He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Hi, I'm Paul Roy, and just a word of warning. This series contains graphic descriptions of rescues and fatalities, as well as some spicy language. Although at times confronting, they are the unvarnished reality of the work of land search and rescue volunteers, and those that have been rescued. So, if unsettling personal stories affect you, a strong cup of tea might be in order. Episode 6. No Regrets.
A rescue attempt is expected soon to bring down the two climbers stranded for more than a week near the summit of Mount Cook.
We're rejoining a classic mountain search and rescue story at a nail-biting moment.
The pair, Mark Inglis and Phil Doole, were spotted in a helicopter sweep last night, and food and clothing was dropped to them in an area known as the Mid-Peaks Run.
Mark Inglis and Phil Doole are trapped in a crevasse at 3,000 metres, high on the side of Aoraki Mount Cook, New Zealand's highest peak.
There's also been radio contact with the climbers, who say they're weak but in good condition, although apparently they haven't eaten for nearly a week.
They've been in a dodgy snow cave with only a few snacks, no water or sleeping bags in foul weather.
But the two men have told the rescue team they have no significant medical problems and are in a safe and sheltered place.
Neither can climb down to safety unassisted, and the only option is to be rescued. Then came the break they'd been hoping for. Ron Small and Don Bogie managed to fly through the clouds to where Phil and Mark were sheltering. Too windy and dangerous to land, the chopper dropped sacks of emergency supplies, sleeping bags, water, food, a gas cooker and a radio.
Anyway, all this stuff landed.
Phil Doole.
One bag hit me, and one bag, unfortunately, I didn't see it or something, and it just slid off down the mountain. Fortunately, there were 4 of them.
Pressure from the media was enormous.
Making the rescuers' already difficult job practically impossible.
If they weren't getting the story, they were making it up.
Pilot Ron Small.
The chief ranger at the time, Bert Youngman, did a marvellous job. He isolated us, like myself and the Alpine guys, the rescue guys, from the media fairly early on.
With the rescue attempt about to begin on Mount Cook for the two climbers who've been up there for a week, we spoke to the Chief Ranger, Bert Youngman. We asked him how the men appeared to be when they were first spotted last night, and radio contact was made with them.
They're weak, but they're in good condition, and considering the length of time they've been up there, and no significant medical problems. Got all the supplies they need. They're settled into what they call Mid-Peak Hotel. We want them down as soon as practical.
You've always expressed optimism about finding them safe and well during this entire week. Why was that?
Mainly because I knew the guys. We all knew them as people with grit and the ability to do the right things by themselves, and that looks like exactly what they've done. They'll have an interesting tale to tell when they do get down.
Well, the weather seems set fair on Mount Cook. You may like to know what it's doing in...
It seemed their troubles were almost at an end, and they just needed to hang on until the following day to be lifted off. At the Mount Cook village, media speculation was high of a successful rescue. The climbers too were buoyant, confident their ordeal would soon be over.
Yeah, we thought, well, it's the wind's still too high to be rescued tonight, so we'll be out in the morning.
Mark Inglis.
It will have been a 7-day sojourn on the summit of Cook.
Now with a cooker, food and communications, the boys remained hopeful of an early rescue. But the weather had other plans. Don Bogie.
We were reasonably optimistic we'd be able to do it in the next day or so in a gap in the weather, but the weather came in.
Yeah, we were all waiting for this break in the weather that was supposed to have come, like 4 days before or something, just in terms of the weather patterns.
Phil Doole.
But what happens? The wind carries on for another bloody best part of a week.
With the weather closed in again, Phil and Mark took stock of their supplies.
cans of Irish stew, some energy chocolates. There was some socks. There was our standard two-way radio, which was the old tape radio in its metal case with its little D-cell batteries in the bottom.
You'd think having a radio would be the ultimate lifeline for the two climbers, already having been isolated for a week. But it turned out to be a mixed blessing.
One of the hardest things the next morning is they put Anne on the radio.
Anne, Mark's wife, back in Christchurch with their daughter.
And that changes your whole attitude, really, because we were just completely focused on survival. And so the radio was a real boon, but it was also a real negative at the same time. And that it adds in all these other psychological things that you need to process.
Was that you then felt responsible because they were worrying for you?
Very much so, because it divvies up the amount of psychological resilience or psychological strength that you have, and they've just added in another layer. Well, whilst it was always there, you're always thinking about it, hearing her voice and, knowing that Lucy, who was 10 months old, was there as well, and all those other responsibilities come flooding on in like a big wave. Before, it was just compartmentalised. We knew we were going to be rescued. We knew we were going to be rescued. And so that made it really hard. If we didn't know we were going to be rescued, if it was going to be the last words we ever say, then that was a completely different situation.
And everybody's euphoric because, Dad's alive and everything, which is true. But it's sort of like, I don't think many people actually think about what effect that may have. I know my mother was, she's pretty stoic or resigned, partly because I'd had that previous prang.
The prang, being fooled tonight in the crevasse with a broken pelvis a year earlier.
I think to her, to some extent, what's he done now, It's sort of like, again, that would be fine if we were pulled out of there 24 hours later. It wouldn't have been a thing.
To add to their woes, the batteries on their radio, their lifeline to the outside world, died, leaving them without communication again. With radio comms dead, it was a small transistor radio that saved the day. Mark Inglis.
We knew they were sending messages at night via Radio Scenic Land, I think it was, out of Greymouth, and we knew to listen in to that.
While it may have been a comfort getting news from their transistor, it didn't change their dire situation.
And it just got harder, and it got harder as the days went on.
Phil and Mark were now into day 13 of their ordeal, again with no communications, and the outlook increasingly bleak. But there were other plans being made for their rescue, in the likely event the chopper could not get in to lift them off. One of these plans involved getting a doctor with the right medical and alpine experience.
I was on my way back from a weekend up in Christchurch with some friends who actually knew Phil and Mark quite well, and we were sitting out in the sun on the Port Hills wondering how they were getting on.
Dr. Dick Price was a seasoned mountaineer in New Zealand, and indeed on Aoraki Mount Cook itself, as well as having high altitude experience as a mountaineer and medic in the Himalayas, including a climb of Everest on his 6th attempt. Worried about the health of the climbers, the rescue team made contact with Dick before Phil and Mark had even been located.
On the way back to Oamaru, where I was practicing, I called in to see Gary Brie, who's the leader of the Timaru Alpine team that backed up Cook. And he said, we want to get hold of you. I then made direct contact with the Cook team, and that's when the discussion about survivability took place.
Dick, what did they know of their situation at that time when they contacted you?
Well, all I knew was that they had gone out on a climb and possibility of them being Middle Peak area, but we did not know anything about where they were, other than the fact that they were long overdue. So I was being asked about, how long could they survive, and we were pretty concerned about hypothermia versus frostbite. So it wasn't until the Tuesday that they actually found them, when there was just a brief clearance in the weather. And I flew up then via Fairley, where we picked up a defibrillator. If we had to do a sudden stroke rescue, the sudden movement in someone with hypothermia could create a cardiac arrest. From the radio comms, we could get an idea about how well they were. These days, there's an acronym called AVPU, whether they're alert, whether they respond to voice, pain, or unconscious, which they use for determining hypothermia, but they've added into that confusion. So they didn't sound at all confused, so we assumed that they were not hypothermic, which was really good news. Obviously, there was concern about the fact that they had numb toes, and so we assumed that they might have frostbite.
And in a situation like that, Dick, how much does the psychological strength play a part, apart from all the physical things they were having to cope with?
Well, I think it's hugely important. It was interesting when I was getting involved in mountain medicine way back. They did some studies on elite climbers, and a key thing that came through was their mental attitude. That's what determined how good they were. They're both incredibly stoic. I'm just amazed at their resilience.
Mark and Phil were going to have to be stoic quite a bit longer.
And so the other thing we started doing is we started more in-depth planning on how would we get them off if we couldn't use the helicopters.
Lead rescuer, Don Bogie.
Plan was to establish a camp on the Upper Empress Shelf with a snow cave big enough for the doctor and some rescuers.
The helicopter may not have been able to get to Mark and Phil because of the high winds, but it could drop off a rescue team on the Empress Ice Shelf, which carried its own risks. The ice shelf at 3,000 metres is riddled with crevasses and prone to avalanche danger. Not the sort of place climbers usually linger. The plan was for the team to climb up to the trapped mountaineers and lower them down the mountain, a risky and dangerous procedure involving 8 or 10 rescuers to carry the stretchers.
Suddenly the weather cleared really fast, and we went, wow, clearing. And by this time, I think the police had insisted the Air Force should come up and have some role in the operation, so they'd sent an Iroquois.
The Iroquois was the helicopter used at the time by the RNZAF. And this is where it all began to go wrong. Not through any fault of the mountaineers.
The Air Force had been ringing up saying, why aren't we involved in this rescue? This is our job, blah, blah, blah.
Chopper pilot Ron Small.
So they got the Iroquois to help me get a team of people up onto the Empress Ice Shelf. The Chief Ranger asked me if I'd give the Air Force guys a briefing about where they're going. I thought, me? Giving the RNZAF a briefing? Anyway, I told him, I said, you guys, you won't be able to do your standard 12-foot hover up there. I said, there's a metre of fresh snow. You've got to get down low, even climb up onto your landing spot and just run it on, which is what we did all day and every day. It was just standard for us. But that wasn't the way the Air Force operated.
Following his briefing to the Iroquois crew, Ron flew into the Empress Ice Shelf in his own helicopter with the first party of rescuers, including Dr. Dick Price, prepared to dig in for an extended stay. The Iroquois would follow with 4 additional rescuers.
They had a lot of spare gear for the camp. Instead of taking stuff out of it to lighten it a bit for higher altitude, they just got the 4 guys with all their gear, and it turns out that overloaded the machine.
But the second mistake was even more crucial. Ignoring the advice of chopper pilot Ron Small in their briefing. Not to hover, but to fly in low and hard.
But the Air Force don't like doing that. They like coming down in steps and then holding a metre off the ground while the crewman gives the directions. And so doing that gives you maximum wind-blown snow all around the machines.
Dr. Dick Price.
Digger Joyce and Neil Weston and I flew in with Ron Small, and we flew over the area to just assess it, and he could see that there was quite a bit of powder snow.
Ron Small.
We threw a pack out, so I had a spot look at, and then you just fly into it, just drive into it.
We just climbed out into very deep powder snow, grabbed all our gear, and away he went. We were pretty chuffed to be there, ready to go, and the Iroquois came in with the backup team of the 4 climbers. It came right down alongside us, and we could feel the downwash. So they were obviously using us as a marker, but then suddenly there was some thudding and silence. At first I thought, they don't usually shut down that quick. I remember looking up and seeing the Iroquois just about 50 metres away, and it just didn't look quite as it should.
The helicopter had crashed.
And the tail was hanging out over a 1,000-foot cliff. That's when I realised it was upside down. We rushed over to it, and Kim Logan had burst out through the Iroquois, and he wasn't going to be inside when it caught fire. But the rest of the crew were all still strapped in, completely upside down, apart from the crewman who had been on the wire, and he had an injured shoulder, so I took him back to where our gear was. We put the air crew to work digging a trench to get out of the wind, and that kept them warm as well.
And the guys on the ground told me that they had 3 attempts at a 12-foot hover, and the third one they went upside down.
Chopper pilot Ron Small.
So it was just training. They had no experience in that environment and how to handle powder snow.
Well, it could have been very serious.
Oh my God, unbelievable. Oh, it could have been catastrophic.
Back at the park headquarters, Don Bogie received news of the crash.
That could have killed 7 people. That was just so close to 7 fatalities.
There's always a lead into an accident, and that accident happened, in my opinion, before they left Christchurch, because they had been ringing up saying, why aren't we involved? This is our job, why aren't we involved? And they were going to do this rescue come hell or high water. So they were there in the wrong frame of mind. This is only my opinion. People will challenge this, but that's fine.
The crash not only shocked those on the Empress Shelf and at park headquarters, but had a marked effect on the 2 trapped climbers.
Like, we knew the wind had dropped and stuff, so we knew that there was a possibility, even though we weren't talking to anyone, of something happening.
They couldn't see the crash, but they heard it.
Iroquois coming in and the choppers coming up Hooker Valley on the Empress side. The noise of the Iroquois crashing on the Empress Shelf. And that just blew us away, because we thought, fuck, there could be up to 10 people killed on that trying to help us.
Mark, what was the effect of that on you?
That would have been the ultimate worst case scenario. That's the whole reason you're a professional search and rescue team. The biggest worry both Phil and I had that whole time up there was our decisions would mean that one of our own search and rescue team would get hurt or killed.
Now Don Bogie has the responsibility of the RNZAF crew stranded on the ice shelf.
And that left us in a dilemma, really, because we had conditions where it was probably possible to do a landing or to do a strop pickup from up high. But at the same time, we also had 3 Air Force staff at 10,000 feet on Aoraki about to spend a night up there. It was getting closer to dark by then, and we didn't do a lot of night operations then. There was no night vision gear. So the decision was made by the controller to fly the Air Force out, which took some time. I think we lost an opportunity to get Mark and Phil off. We probably could have got them off that evening if the time hadn't been spent doing that.
That job fell to Ron Small, who took the Iroquois crew back to park headquarters. In fading light, he and Don Bogie tried a last gasp effort to rescue Phil and Mark.
We did our fly to check them out, and we couldn't actually see them, and we could just see the helmet they'd left outside the cave. We tried a landing to see if we could grab and go, and there was just snow blowing everywhere, and we had to back out. And we went, nah, can't do that now. And And by the time we got back down, pretty much dark, and we went, okay, well, lost that window, we'll try again in the morning. Somewhere along the line, the ranger who'd been sent to talk to the media, I know he mixed up something and said, we think they're clinically dead, because you can have hypothermia and be clinically dead. No, I don't know what, it was something weird, and the media had it, they were dead. So we tried to ignore that.
After 2 weeks trapped in their crevasse, Mark and Phil's health was now critical.
I had a chest infection, and things weren't looking crash hot. Probably spent quite a bit of time in delirium. It was just all I could see was a sidewalk with snow on it, up a steep hill, and you were walking up it in bare feet, and you had to get to the top.
And was there any point, Mark, you thought, well, maybe I'm not going to get out of here?
Well, Phil and I talked about that. We thought we probably had 12 to 18 hours left to live, and it was that we need to be rescued now.
The pressure on the rescuers was now enormous, as an opportunity to pick them up had been sacrificed the day before by rescuing the RNZAF crew.
A lot of media had turned up in the village, and they were wanting to know what was happening, wanting to know what we were doing. There was commentary out there in the wider climbing community by other people saying, you should do this, you should do that, and we would have done this by now.
I was getting a bit buggered, actually. All the media pressure actually was starting to wear me down.
Chopper pilot Ron Small.
I've never experienced anything in my life like it. And I was actually thinking, well, maybe I can't do this. They're saying, why can't you do this? Why can't you do that?
So much pressure on you because they don't understand what's happening.
That's right. Like we're all standing there and looking up the mountains and when are you going to pick them up?
We were still optimistic. They should still be alive even, after day 13 or 14.
Don Bogie.
Once again, the tone in the media was that, can be no way they could still be alive.
At park headquarters in the morning, it was cloudy and lightly snowing. But above the cloud, on the mountain itself, it was actually quite clear. And for the first time in 2 weeks, the wind had dropped. News was relayed from the team in their snow cave on the Empress ice shelf that a helicopter rescue could be worth a go.
3 of us self-got him with Ron and flew down to Glentana, and we got there and sure enough you could see a bit of blue, so we flew up into the blue and then got cloud, and we looked around and went, I can't see Aoraki, but we know it's in that direction and that's the highest bit of cloud, so we started going that way. And we were up at about 11,000 feet and the helicopter wouldn't fly straight, and Ron said, that's the tail rotor icing up because it was minus 20 up there.
On the summit ridge of Aoraki Mount Cook, things were looking up for the climbers as well.
In the morning, we picked up Radio Scenic Land, which is Greymouth Hukatika Way.
Phil Doole.
Listened to them interviewing the CERT leader who was telling them what they were going to do, which was really good. So I thought, shit, I wonder how much time I've got. I got out and went outside and it was just amazing, with snow and ice all around and just being there and no wind. It was just, after 2 weeks, it was amazing actually.
We decided against the landing because of the issues we'd had the night before. We decided that would be a bit risky, basically trying to get them both on board in a hover landing when Phil had told us that Mark wasn't able to walk. And so we went back down to the shelf, landed next to the crashed Aoraki and set up the strop. People say, look, flying on a rope under a helicopter, it must be dangerous. Well, it has risks. I wouldn't think it's as dangerous as trying to lower people down an ice slope in weather that's too strong for a helicopter to hover. And so you got to weigh these things up. It's not rescue them at any cost. Because one of the things I always used to drive home during training was we must not let the situation get worse.
Don Bogie was my number one man. Don clips on to the bottom of it with a radio.
Chopper pilot Ron Small.
He does carry a knife too, so he can cut the rope if it does happen to get snagged or something.
Don was then hoisted up into the air and away they went.
Dr. Dick Price, who was camped on the Empress ice shelf.
I remember looking up at the middle peak and seeing this tiny dot with some wisps of snow being blown by the helicopter and thinking, That's tricky stuff, especially being so close to the crest of the ridge.
If you're hovering with a long line, is your peripheral vision because you've got nothing around you. So you're only looking at that spot down beneath you. You've sort of got nothing to reference because you're just looking 1,000 miles out across the Tasman Sea.
With Don Bogie attached by his cable, swinging underneath the helicopter.
He's the hero of this story. It took big balls to fly around the bottom of the strop with me looking after him. Jesus.
Came in, I landed on the wee shelf in front of the snow cave. Phil was walking around and he had already put his harness on.
I was outside waiting. It was not unexpected to see Don Bogie coming up on the strop. And they came up and dropped another comms radio. So we were able to establish contact and then confirm. And I remember my first question to them was, well, what happened with the chopper crash? And so they told us that everybody was okay.
Because he couldn't walk, Mark was first off. And as the chopper couldn't carry 3 people on the cable, Phil had to wait his turn.
So I said to Ron, I'm going to have to go inside the ice cave to get him, and I'm still clipped on and there was no way I was going to unclip. So I said I need 5 metres extra rope to get inside.
I knew I didn't have much strength or anything, and so to see Don Bogie's face come in up that little tunnel, it's like Father Christmas. It really was. It definitely brings a tear to your eye.
Slid Mark along the ground until he was out in the open, put him in the Bowman bag, clipped everything together, and we flew back down.
We strapped into the Bowman bag and it popped out like a cork and dropped down onto the Empress shelf. That was magic.
You didn't really let go of you very easily, did it, Mount Cook?
No. No, well, it went bad for 19 days after we got off. When we were in there, that was the longest spell of recorded bad weather in Mount Cook history.
So I was up there for however long it took for them to go down and drop them and come back for me. Stuck there by myself, thinking, shit, well, if they don't come back, I'm fucked. Or I'll be here for another week. It was a bit of a flat area just outside the tunnel entrance, reasonably safe, but I had my 2 ice picks there, just to keep me safe because I didn't have crampons on them. I was all ready to be picked up and Don came in and Ron just dropped them in and he was right there and he clipped me in and said, right, we're all good to go. And I just remember dropping the 2 ice picks and letting them just drop away as we took off from the site.
After their 2-week ordeal, the strop rescue all happened in just a few minutes and both climbers were reunited on the Empress ice shelf, still with a bit to do to fly them off, but for now, safe.
I was really, really embarrassed about it because it was the second time round. Even though there were things like we could have moved faster, there's things we could have done, but to some extent I felt that was in hindsight. And we were just pushed the boundaries a bit on the weather.
Phil Doole.
When we were in the search space and being looked over and people looking at our feet wondering whether it was just trench foot or whether we were fucked. I wouldn't relax until I made sure someone told me that everybody was off the hill, that everybody was safe.
Back at the village, Dr. Dick Price examined the pair.
Well, we just checked their temperature and they weren't hypothermic, but we just looked at their feet and they were like frozen lumps of mutton that you've just taken out of the deep freeze.
Phil and Mark each had both legs amputated below the knees.
On Christmas Eve in 1982, that's when the surgeons came in and put the lines on my legs and wheeled me into theatre. Once that cut happened on Christmas Eve, then it was up to me to start, a whole new journey.
Mark became the first double amputee to climb Everest, as well as returning to climb Aoraki Mount Cook again. Soon after his recovery, Phil went on a climbing expedition to Patagonia and also completed a climb on Aoraki Mount Cook. Both have retained their lifelong passion for the mountains, with no regrets. Next time, tourists provide a headache for rescue services.
Hi, it's Jane from the IMT Cover. Is this a bacon?
As photos and videos on social media encourage walkers beyond their experience. Do you have a PLB with you?
A what?
A locator beacon or anything if you get into have a problem?
No.
Okay.
No, we won't have problem.
And even the experienced get it wrong.
We're in the thick of it, in the middle of the glacier. Yeah. We had to navigate with compass, then things just rapidly changed.
And the rescuers are put at risk.
3 tourists we had to pick off at night. It was their second walk ever in the outdoors. No navigation equipment, relying on their phone, and they just shouldn't have been there.
That's next time on Search and Rescue NZ. Thanks to the producers of this series, Phil Vine, Justine Murray and Justin Gregory. Thanks to Ben Pearce, the engineer for this episode. Production coordinator, Brianna Juratich-Gregg. Executive audio editor, Tim Watkin. Find and follow Search and Rescue NZ on your favourite podcast app or at rnz.co.nz/podcasts. Kia ora, and thanks for listening.